Powerful insights often occur when you least expect them. On Transformative Leadership Conversations, they're at the heart of every episode. Hi, I'm your host, Winnie da Silva, and together we're exploring a spectrum of leadership themes through the compelling stories and insights of seasoned leaders and prominent experts. And in each episode, you'll walk away with the inspiration, strategies, and tools to enhance your leadership, build effective teams, and lead thriving organizations. So this month, as you may know, I'm celebrating starting my business 20 years ago this month. So last week's episode, I reflected on this career journey and some of what I've learned along the way. And really, what a privilege it's been to learn from the hundreds of leaders, teams, and companies that I've worked with throughout my entire career. I've never gotten tired of walking alongside leaders and contributing in some small way to the big and subtle transformations that change how they lead and who they are becoming. So, through this journey of breakthroughs, we're first required to wrestle with our doubts, our insecurities, and all the areas where we get stuck. But perhaps most importantly, we must uncover and debunk the lies that we tell ourselves. Now, of course, we all tell ourselves lies like all the time. And sometimes they're harmless little tricks to get us through the day, like, this meeting isn't going to take that long, or I'll just have one more piece of cake. And sometimes they're self-fulfilling prophecies, like, today is going to be a terrible day, or this conversation is going to be really awkward. And so these kinds of lies that we tell ourselves, they're pretty normal. But what I've noticed is that the small, quiet, seemingly insignificant lies we tell about ourselves, they don't usually stay small. They grow roots. They begin to creep up and significantly shape how we think, how we lead, how we see ourselves, and how we see other people. They suddenly become the invisible rules that we live by. So today, I'm going to share with you just one of the lies I see leaders believing in over and over again, and what it's costing us, and how to overcome it. It's also just happens to be a lie that I have a hard time shaking myself, like a really hard time. And so it's this: doing determines my true leadership value. So, in other words, visible action, checking items off my to do list, producing, being responsive to everyone around me shows the world, but perhaps more importantly, shows me that I have value, that I'm a good leader. According to Harvard Business Review, senior leaders spend less than 10% of their time thinking strategically. And Deloitte found that 77% of professionals experience burnout at least once in their careers, with too much work and not enough impact among one of the top reasons. So we're working harder than ever, but are we actually creating more value or just more stuff? In our culture today, we put on a pedestal and revere the people who hustle, who put in the long hours and stay late, who are developing side hustles, who eke out productivity out of every single minute of their day. Essentially, in a world that never stops and is open 24/7 thanks to technology, doing feels good. It feels right. It perhaps feels like this is maybe the very definition of a leader. But the goal isn't to be busy or even, dare I say, productive. The actual goal is to have good quality doing, because doing to do, even if the doing is good, is different than doing that comes out of something. And what is that something? Let's call it deep thinking. Deep thinking allows us to consider our vision for what success really looks like to us, and then to ruthlessly prioritize the goals that are worth accomplishing to actually help us achieve this vision. I'll add one more thing to deep thinking: connecting with people. Now, I'm going to bet that most of us don't include connecting with people as the doing that we should be doing. And yet, the quality of our relationships can many times actually enhance our deep thinking. So, on the surface, busy is an easy badge of leadership. It's pretty difficult to look into someone's head and assess the quality of their thinking, right? We can only truly assess the quality of their output. And this is what organizations, of course, reward and recognize. But when leaders believe that doing demonstrates their true leadership value, it takes a quiet but exacting toll. And it's not just about doing, it's about consuming on our phones and on our other devices, content. I mean, some of it really good. Endlessly, it's there, ready for us to enjoy, to distract us, to erase any boredom. We used to have more white space naturally built into our day, little pockets of time when our minds could wander. Our drive to work, our walk from one meeting to another, waiting in line for coffee, folding laundry. While these moments may not have seemed productive, they were actually doing something very important, giving our brains room to breathe, to process, to make sense of things. Now, those spaces are pretty much gone because every pause in our day, every spare minute, usually gets filled with something: scrolling, responding, checking, watching, consuming. Without any of that white space, we've lost one of the simplest and most natural ways and time to think. When leaders believe that doing demonstrates their true leadership value, the cost shows up everywhere, actually, in our own well being, in our relationships, and in the quality of our leadership. So let's start with ourselves in leadership. It's almost impossible to think clearly and deeply when we're so busy producing, responding, consuming, and solving that we forget to pause and ask the bigger questions like this: what's actually important here? Is this worth my energy and time? We essentially end up losing access to our best ideas because they require quiet, they require time. When leaders spend all their time doing, and we stop leading our organizations into the future, and instead, we're just keeping it afloat. We're managing momentum instead of creating long term strategic value. Our decisions become narrower. We optimize what exists instead of imagining what could be. And before long, we build cultures where everyone's working harder and harder, but the real thinking, the real innovation, the real leadership ends up getting lost. The lack of time to think deeply, to process, to be strategic can also, believe it or not, lead to being tired. And not just being physically tired, but mentally and emotionally tired, which perhaps leads us to another lie that all that scrolling consuming, that'll give us some rest. But perhaps we'll tackle that lie on another episode. Prioritizing busyness and productivity over time, over deep thinking, can also cause us to lose perspective. Everything feels urgent. It feels more personal. And this reactivity can lead to reactive responses in our relationships, reactive decision making, which can easily create larger problems for us down the road. So, how does this lie of doing determines my true leadership value impact our relationships at work? One of the biggest costs of this lie is that it robs us of the time and mental space to think, not just about our work, but about our relationships. When we're constantly doing, we stop being strategic about who we need to connect with, how we should engage with them, and why those relationships matter. In fact, we stop seeing our relationships as part of the work, as the very channels through which we can influence, collaborate, and where great ideas can flow. Within our teams, we miss the chance to engage and develop our people deliberately because we're too focused on today's tasks, too busy proving our own value through getting things done. But when we lead with deep thinking, it's different. We become more intentional about where we involve others, how we coach, and what we delegate. We start to see development not just as an extra thing to do, but as the way to get the work done today and develop stronger future leaders. When we make time to think, we create space for our team to think too. And this is where real growth and ownership can happen. So instead of just driving performance, we're equipping our future leaders for performance. And with our peers, we often forget that some of our greatest leadership impact comes from collaborating across functions, not just within our own teams. And when we do that, we extend our leadership beyond our team and further into the company. But when we don't make time to think, it's easy to default to coordination instead of collaboration. We stay in our lanes. But when we think more deeply, we start to see the bigger system, how our work connects, overlaps, and how we can multiply if we do that work together. We begin to lead across boundaries instead of staying confined by them. And that's when we move from simply protecting our piece of the business to helping elevate the entire enterprise. When we prioritize busyness with our bosses and senior stakeholders, we end up going into conversations prepared to report progress to show how much we've done, instead of offering strategic insights and shaping direction. When we consistently make time for deep thinking, we don't just elevate our own leadership, we start to show up as strategic partners for our boss and for other senior stakeholders. We end up positioning ourselves to offer perspective, ideas, and insight that help them lead better. So instead of waiting for direction, we can actually help shape it. That's when we move from managing our work to influencing the work itself, even the people leading it. Some of the most effective leaders have known this for a really long time, that carving out space is absolutely essential to their strategic leadership. This reminds me of a story that I once heard through the New York Times about George Shultz, who served as U.S. Secretary of State under President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. So, George Shultz had a ritual. Once a week, he would sit alone in his office with a pad of paper and a pen, close the door, and tell his secretary, "Don't interrupt me unless it's my wife or the president." And in that single quiet hour each week, he wasn't catching up on his work. It was for thinking, for stepping back from the flood of urgent decisions and reflecting on the long term direction of U.S. foreign policy. Schultz later said that it was the only way he could focus on what really mattered amidst the noise and the pressure of daily crisis. So, what strikes me about this really simple story is how scheduled and ritualized his efforts were to carve out time to think deeply. He understood that constant activity does not equal strategic leadership. Quality time to think does. So, Schultz's thinking hour reminds me and all of us that leadership isn't just about responding faster or producing more. It's truly about creating the mental room and really the physical room to ask yourself better questions, to peek around the corners and make wiser choices. It's really creating the kind of space that's almost impossible to find when we equate our worth with how much we're doing. That's the heart of the lie that so many leaders believe, that visible busyness is the proof of leadership value. But what Schultz knew is that the real proof lies in the thinking that guides the doing. So, how can we start to overcome this lie? Well, first, it starts with understanding why it's so hard to carve out time for quality thinking, to get underneath that lie. The belief that doing undermines my true leadership value isn't just about wanting to be productive. It truly ends up being about our identity. It's rooted in this quiet fear that if I'm not busy, I'll lose my relevance. That if I'm not constantly proving my worth, I might not have any. But the truth is, leadership isn't something you prove, it's something that you practice. So we have to change the story we tell ourselves about what good leadership looks like. Instead of believing my worth comes from doing, we can begin to believe something like this instead. My worth as a leader comes from how I think, how I connect, and how I lead using a strategic mindset. And even if that's hard to fully believe right now, we can all start to practice our way into it because there is some really good news here. Behavior often rewrites belief. So, let me offer a few small practical ways to begin creating space for you to deeply think and spend time thinking. So, let me offer a few small practical ways we all can begin to create space and time for deep thinking, starting perhaps right now, today. So, number one, schedule white space like it's a meeting. This is a great idea, right? Because your calendar right now is stuffed with meetings. So literally put it on your calendar. Block 15, 20, 30 minutes once a week. No phone, no laptop, no to do agenda, just space to think. Now, you're going to be tempted to fill it, you're going to be tempted to cancel it. Don't. I believe that over time, this is where our best ideas will start to emerge. Number two, capture questions, not just answers. So, what I suggest to clients, and I've done this myself, keep a small thinking journal. So, it could be space, paper, or electronic, where you write down questions you don't have time to think about yet, or emerging hunches or half baked ideas you'd like to explore later. There are at least two benefits to starting this habit. First, you'll have a list of items you'd like to turn your attention to during your white space thinking time. And number two, you may start to see patterns emerge that could point to some strategic breakthroughs. Okay, number three, protect conversation time that's not about tasks, not about to dos, not about updates on the work. So once a week, find a colleague, a peer, a senior stakeholder, maybe even a direct report, not to update and not to talk about the work, but to connect and think together. Maybe ask questions like, what are we not seeing? What's the bigger opportunity here? What are some things that we don't have time to think about that we wish we did? Strategic thinking many times emerges in dialogue. Number four, reclaim your in between moments. This might be the hardest thing, right? So shift your habits to not fill every single gap in your day with your phone or another device. The drive, the walk, the line for coffee. Instead, use these moments to allow your brain to process or to reset. Let your mind wander. You might be surprised what it comes back with. Okay, and then the last one. Start today a small but tiny experiment. So, deep thinking doesn't have to start with a grand planned or a full committed half day retreat. Okay. Make the bar really low at first. Start with a small but deliberate 5 or 10 minute experiment. Close your laptop after a meeting and jot down what you learned, right? Take a short walk without your phone and notice what ideas emerge. End your week by asking yourself one reflective question and write it down, like, what's the most important thing I thought about this week? What's the biggest insight I had? So the goal isn't to overhaul your entire schedule. Find ways to build this muscle of curiosity and reflection. Create tiny experiments. They really can help reshape your beliefs and give you information on raising the bar for your next experiment, all with the goal of creating time for quality thinking. Okay, so as I said earlier, this is a lie I really wrestle with myself, that doing determines my value, that if I'm not producing and checking things off my list, I'm somehow falling behind because I feel like I have so much on my to do list. And that's exactly why I want to challenge myself with you to carve out more time for quality thinking. So I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to run my own tiny experiment. And I'm keeping the bar low. Beginning next month in November, I'm committing to carving out 45 minutes in my schedule once a week, every week, to simply think. So, no phone, no computer, no email, just a notebook and a pen, and the discipline to stay in that quiet space. So, maybe I'll do my office or maybe I'll check into a cafe, but for 45 minutes, I'm going to take a break from doing, and instead I'll sit quietly and see what thinking emerges. Then, at the beginning of the next month in December, I'll report back a little reporting, a little bit of accountability on how it went, what I noticed, where I was successful, and where I struggled. So if this lie is resonating with you and you're finding it hard to let go of the doing, come join me. Create your own version of this experiment. You can do what I'm doing or do something else. Do something, smaller, do something bigger, whatever feels right to you. I mean, it could be a 10-minute walk once a week, right? That's really small. Half an hour without your phone, that's it. Carving out a meeting with yourself, that could be a thinking block. Anything. Try anything. And if you do try it, could you please let me know? What did you try? What did you learn? What did you discover? What shifted in you? What was really difficult? Let's see what happens when we shift that lie from proving our value through what we do and start rediscovering it through how we think. Because ultimately, leadership isn't about how much you do. It's about how we think, how we connect, and how courageously we act on what really matters. Thank you for listening to this episode of Transformative Leadership Conversations. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level or empower your teams for success, I'm here to help. Reach out to me directly at winnie@winifred.org or check out my website at www.winniedasilva.com to learn more about my work in coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, and working with clients to build effective teams. You can also find me on Substack and LinkedIn, and now on YouTube. Because you are always welcome to take a seat at the table where every conversation has the potential for transformative change.